The most important book on the intellectual life ever written by a Christian was composed by a man who had been publicly silenced, forbidden to publish, forbidden to lecture, stripped of his platform for 17 years. Not by enemies, by Rome itself. And inside that silence, with no audience, no pulpit, and no one listening, he wrote the manual that would eventually travel from a Dominican monastery in France to Cal Newport's desk at MIT, and from there into the hands of millions of people who have never heard his name. His name was Antonin Dalmache Sertillanges. He was a Dominican friar, and the thing he wrote about, with greater precision than anyone before or since, was what to do when the world goes quiet around you and you're left alone with your hours. There's a question underneath this video. You may not have said it out loud yet. It sounds something like, is this silence I'm living in, this quiet that arrived without my asking for it, is it just what getting older feels like? Or is there something I'm supposed to be doing inside it? We're going to stay with that question for the next several minutes. Because the answer, coming from a man who lived inside enforced silence for nearly 2 decades, is not what you expect. Let's start with what it actually feels like. You know the house at 6 in the morning, the way it sits around you, the coffee going, no one else stirring. The adult children are in their own cities now, their own lives. Maybe your spouse is still asleep. Or maybe you're alone in a way that goes deeper than sleeping arrangements. The career is behind you, or winding down, or gone. The noise that used to structure the day, the schedules, the obligations, the constant being needed, that noise has receded, and in its place, this. The silence was supposed to be a reward. You spent 40 years earning it. But some mornings it doesn't feel like a reward, it feels like an aftermath. Like the world moved on and you're sitting in what's left. That feeling has a name in the wellness literature. They call it loneliness, and they treat it as a health problem. Something to solve through connection, through social prescriptions, through keeping yourself busy. The Christian devotional version is gentler but not much different. Offer it up. Pray through it. It's a cross. Neither of those answers is wrong, exactly, but neither of them says what Sertillanges says. What Sertillanges says is something different enough to stop you cold. To understand it, you have to know who he was. He was born in 1863 in Clermont-Ferrand, in the Auvergne region of France, the same city as it happens, where Blaise Pascal was born 240 years earlier. Whether Sertillanges ever remarked on that coincidence, I don't know. But there is something fitting about it. The city that gave the modern world one of its most piercing minds about the human condition gave it another. He became a Dominican at a young age. The Dominicans are the order of preachers, founded in the 13th century, shaped by Thomas Aquinas, committed to the idea that serious intellectual work and deep faith are not in competition, but are, in fact, one enterprise. Sertillanges spent his life inside that tradition. He was a philosopher, a theologian, a preacher of real distinction. On the 11th of November 1918, the day the Great War ended, he delivered the memorial sermon at the Madeleine in Paris, before the President of the Republic and the assembled dignitaries of France. By any measure, he was a man at the height of his public influence. And then Rome silenced him. The details of the controversy belong to the tangled history of early 20th century Catholic theology, the modernism disputes, the concerns about certain philosophical positions. What matters for our purposes is simpler. Somewhere around 1919, Sertillanges found himself without a platform. The lecture halls went quiet. The publications stopped. For approximately 17 years, one of the most intellectually serious men in the French Catholic world was effectively invisible. He was in his mid-50s when it began. And inside that silence, the unwanted kind, the one that arrived not by choice but by circumstance, he wrote The Intellectual Life. The book was published in French in 1920, when Sertillanges was 57 years old. It would take nearly 3 decades for the English translation to appear. For most of the 20th century, it was known only to those who already knew where to look. And then, in 2016, a computer science professor at MIT named Cal Newport published a book called Deep Work, and in it, he named Sertillanges as a precursor. Newport had read The Intellectual Life and recognized something essential in it, a manual, written nearly a century earlier, for the kind of sustained, distraction-free cognitive work he was trying to describe for the modern knowledge worker. That lineage is documented. Newport says so in the text. Millions of people who read Deep Work encountered Sertillanges' ideas, most of them without knowing his name. But here's what Newport did and didn't do. Newport took the silence. He understood that Sertillanges was describing something real about the conditions required for serious work. The need to clear the noise, to protect the hours, to resist the shallow. Newport built a career on that insight, and it's a genuine one. What Newport left behind, because it wasn't his subject, and because deep work is a book for the secular knowledge economy, was the reason Sertillanges believed the silence matters. For Newport, silence is a productivity tool. It is what you need in order to produce work of high value. That is not wrong. But it is less than half of what Sertillanges meant. For Sertillanges, silence is something closer to a liturgical condition. It is what the soul requires in order to do the work that is, at its root, an act of worship. He was a Dominican writing in the Thomist tradition. For him, the intellectual life is a participation in truth, and truth, capital T, is not an abstraction. It is God. When he tells you to protect your hours and go deep, he is not telling you to optimize your output. He is telling you to pray with your mind. That is the thing Newport's readers got the shape of without the substance. Here's where the ebook fits naturally into what you're beginning to see. If the silence you've been living in is actually a workspace, and the work that belongs inside it is something more than productivity, something closer to the life the tradition has always been calling you toward, then you want to walk into that workspace with something in your hands. There is a resource in the description called the Sertillanges Vault, 70 of his most precise quotes, each one annotated with the full context, the theological tradition behind it, and one specific way to carry it into your week. It's formatted to be printed and kept, something to have open on the desk while you're in your 2 hours. The link is in the description. Now, back to the book itself, and the claim at its center. Early in the intellectual life, Sertillanges poses what may be the most confrontational question in the literature of Christian self-development. He asks, have you 2 hours a day? Not 10. Not a sabbatical. Not a seminary degree or a theological library or a young man's unencumbered years. 2 hours. He addresses this question explicitly to the person who does not have vast leisure, the person whose life is already shaped by obligation, by work, by family, by the ordinary demands of being human in the world. He is not writing for monks with empty afternoons. He is writing for the person who has to find the hours in the margins, who has to be deliberate about protecting a small window of serious time inside an otherwise occupied life. And he says, if you have 2 hours a day and the will to use them, the intellectual life, the serious, formed, faith-shaped life of the mind, is not behind you. It is available to you, not as a consolation prize, not as a lesser version of what the scholars have, but as the real thing. But here is the condition he places on those 2 hours. And this is the claim that doesn't survive the trip through Newport's productivity framework. He says the worker needs an interior solitude that no crowd can break. Not silence in the external sense, not just a quiet room and a closed door, though those matter. An interior disposition, a settled stillness that exists before the book is opened and persists after it's closed. Something that is cultivated over time, the way the monastic tradition cultivates it, not as a technique, but as a formation of the soul. He is describing, in the language of a 20th century Dominican friar, what the Desert Fathers called hesychia, the interior quiet that is the precondition for serious encounter with the true, the good, and the beautiful. It is older than Sertillanges by 15 centuries. He is not inventing it, he is translating it for a modern reader. And the question is, where does that interior solitude come from? Part of the answer is practice, the habits of attention and recollection he describes throughout the book. But part of the answer, and this is the part Newport could not have said, is that it comes from life itself. From the years. From the accumulation of experience that strips away the noise of ambition and striving and proving. From the arrival, sometimes unwanted, sometimes gradual, of a quieter life. Which brings us back to you, or rather, back to Sertillanges, because here is what I want you to sit with. Not as a nice idea, but as a fact about the man and what he did. The book that became Cal Newport's source. The book that named the conditions for serious intellectual and spiritual work. The book that, nearly a century after its writing, is still the most demanding and most honest manual on the life of the mind that the Christian tradition has produced. That book was written by a man in his mid to late 50s who had been stripped of his public platform, who had no audience, no lecture hall, no readers waiting for him, who was living inside an unwanted, unasked-for silence that had been handed to him not as a gift but as a judgment. He did not wait for the silence to end before he began. He did not spend those 17 years managing his loneliness, filling the quiet, keeping himself busy. He went into it. He used it. He wrote from inside it the most important thing he ever wrote, and he did it without knowing whether anyone would ever read it. The parallel is not a metaphor I am constructing for your comfort. It is structural. The quiet house. The receded noise. The years after the career, after the children, after the accumulated obligations of the first half of life. The sense of being without a platform, without an audience, without anyone waiting to hear what you've learned. That is not what loneliness looks like when it goes wrong. That is what the condition looks like from the outside, before you understand what it's for. Sertillanges didn't theorize about productive solitude from a comfortable position with eager students in front of him. He lived exactly what you're living. And from inside that exact condition, he wrote the thing that mattered most. You are not in the aftermath of your life. You are in the condition the tradition requires. The silence that arrived without your asking. The quiet that the wellness industry wants to cure and the devotional literature wants to consecrate is not a vacancy waiting to be filled. It is a workspace. And the question Sertillanges puts to you, the same question he was asking himself in those 17 years, is not, how do I make peace with being alone? It is, have you 2 hours a day? Because if you do, 2 hours, seriously protected, walked into with intention, then what can happen inside them is not a hobby or a coping mechanism or even a form of self-improvement in the way that word usually lands. It is, in Sertillanges' precise theological language, an act of worship. The mind going toward truth is the mind going toward God, not as a metaphor, as the real thing. Study, for Sertillanges, is a form of prayer, not instead of prayer, not a replacement for the rosary or the liturgy, but a mode of encounter with the same one you've been seeking at Mass your whole life. And the silence you're already living in, the very silence that feels like loss, is the condition in which that encounter becomes possible, not in spite of the quiet. Because of it, there is a sentence in The Intellectual Life that I want to leave with you. It is not the most dramatic sentence in the book, but it is the one that stays. Sertillanges writes, in substance, the years of a human life are not wasted when they appear to produce nothing visible. They are preparation, and preparation of this kind is never wasted on whoever is willing to use what remains. He never told you it was too late. He never pretended the silence was easy. He sat inside 17 years of enforced quiet. No audience, no platform, no certainty that anyone would ever read a word. And he wrote a book about what to do with exactly the years you have left. So here is the one question I want to leave open. Not to answer, to carry. If you had 2 serious hours tomorrow morning, inside the silence you're already living, what would you do with them? Not the fantasy version. Not the version where you have more time or more energy or a better library. Tomorrow morning, 2 hours. What would you open? Because Sertillanges' answer, the one he lived rather than preached, is that the right question is never whether enough time remains. It's whether you're willing to use what does. If you've ever started studying something seriously and then let life pull you away from it, what was it? And would you go back?